everyone. You know, the topic is that I think Stan assigned a very big topic for me, the vision of LID in Southern California. I can't say that I have a vision because there's more of a just my perspective because there's so many experts in the room. So I would say I want to talk about some general topics with a little bit focus on Orange County in Southern California. So we actually, I invited some friends from China. Some of them are having technical issues, but they promise they're going to actually watch the YouTube video later on. So we have a pretty good crowd. So next slide. Let's see. Okay, so this is the outline of the presentation. I want to talk about the limitations, cost, benefit, performance, different types of LID, in terms of new or retrofit or the infrastructure add-on. I think the previous speakers talked on some of the limitations, including maintenance and operations and things like that. So I will focus on a little bit higher level issues. So I'll try to, give my perspective. I also want to talk a little bit about LID and water quality, LID and water resource, again, with a little bit focus on Southern California, because I understand the issues here are probably different from the issues in Australia and issues from other parts of the US or in China. So I'll give the focus on the Southern California, then a summary. So this slide, next slides, I think I mentioned it in the last presentation. So the message is that LID is not for everywhere because of the limitations in both natural conditions, things like topography, soil type, groundwater, or man-made issues like land use, soil, groundwater contamination, and things like that. So if we use the GIS-based approach to, these slides give an example for Newport Bay watershed, which is in central Orange County. So we did a GIS layer and analyzed the natural and anthropogenic information and overlay them and come up with the limitations for LID implementation. So figure H, which is at the center bottom of the slide, it shows if we overlay all the limitations, there are only very few places where we can actually implement LID because of the soil or land use or land ownership or groundwater issues. So this showed, when we actually think about LID implementation, especially for certain type of LID like infiltration, we need to consider all the facts. So this graph shows the entire Orange County, and using the same process that I described before, the red dots are pretty much the area where, after all the limitations are considered, these are the places where we could implement infiltration type of LID. So as you can see, very few places are actually amenable. I think Andrea talked about private, public cost, issues, land ownership issues. So these red dots are pretty much public-owned parcels. So because a lot of restrictions where we could implement LID, liability issues, cost issues, and things like that. So considering all of this, very few places we could actually implement LID. So let's see. Cost, of course, it's a part of the deal, because if we try to, going outside of the market factor, the cost for land acquisition, sometimes you have to consider it. You buy land to implement LID, which usually it means a lot of cost. The other cost could be, if you don't do LID, or you have some issues that could have been solved by implementing LID and you don't do it and you go out of compliance, the compliance penalty or compliance cost could play a role. So that's something that's think about. The red dot, which here I showed, is actually where UCI is. I want to put that one in is because UCI and some other places are recently added into the phase 2 stormwater permit. We actually invited the environmental manager for UC Irvine to our campus to share our experience and our perspective how to achieve stormwater compliance and LID. I think for UCI folks, they are actually doing pretty well. There are quite a few sites on campus, and I'm sure Stan knows some of them. So next slide. For LID, I mentioned LID has many limitations, including climate. So this picture showed the Millennium Park in Chicago. I'm actually gonna visit Chicago in August, so I'll take a note. I'm gonna visit Millennium Park. I think Chicago stands out in terms of the implementation of LID, especially green roof. And this one is a good example of a green roof. Obviously, green roof is something that in Southern California we have considered. Even for the project right outside of my office, we are actually, as I speak, there are folks outside working for an LID project. And for this project, we thought about green roof, but because of many reasons, including the precipitation pattern, temperature or the irrigation needs, just because of the climate condition in Southern California, it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to implement green roof because of the structural need, cost, and the need for a lot of irrigation when there is no rain, which is very rare in Southern California. So that's one of the reasons. I'm going to talk about other reasons later on. And we also need to think about the other natural factors for green roof or other LIDs. Other than the climate, there could be substrate like Toronto. They have a substrate or subsoil that's pretty much produced by glacier activities, and in winter the frozen soil gonna cause a lot of issues for infiltration type of LIDs. So next one is just to show you the case study in Houston. This one actually was taken a few days ago by a drone. As many of you know that they are actually experiencing a historic flood, and many people actually died. So this one is a park that is built on top of Buffalo Bayou, which runs through the city. And interestingly, I was there last year when I was attending the LID International Conference. And this location was where I took a friend of mine from China took a picture of mine, and you can see it was dry, and the river actually was to my left, way out there. And in the flood, it's just overtopped the whole bayou and flooded a very large area of the city. I think the lesson from this picture is that for Houston, because of the specific soil type, which is has very poor infiltration ability, infiltration rate, the ability to implement infiltration type of LID is very limited. That's one of the reasons why it's when the storm is huge, they have issues dealing with that. And I think for cities like Houston, probably they need to focus a little bit more on harvesting and other infrastructure. But on the other hand, I think all the LID implementation need to consider the size of the storm, because LID can't fix everything. you have to have other type of infrastructure in place to make it work. And next slide, it shows the multiple benefits for LID. I think everybody is pretty well aware of, so I'm not gonna go into details. And the next one is just a graphics that prepared by our consultants when they helped me design our campus LID project, and different type of LID and their performance in terms of water quality improvements are shown. I think the data is mostly based on the international BMP database, where for different type of pollutants, the average performance was shown here, and that's actually how we came up with the 95% of the load reduction, because our project is gonna keep 85% of the runoff from the site, and out of the 15 remaining percent of the runoff, we're gonna remove about 2/3 of the pollution. As you can see, look at most of the BMPs or LIDs can remove from about 50 to 75% of the pollution load, and that's how I come up with 5% remaining discharge of pollutant, so 95% removal. And next slide is the cost consideration for the LID implementation. This also was prepared by our consultant for different options. As you can see, I mentioned earlier, when we consider green roof, which could look pretty good, but again, the cost is very high compared to all the other options. Pervious paving, it is expensive, but it looks good. But also, we need parking spaces where we have to have a way of not only accommodating the LID project, but also practical consideration. That's why we have permeable paving. We have all the other different LID type as well. So the message for this one is that for LID, cost is a very important consideration. Even though overall our performance cost effectiveness is not that great, because we want to use our project site to be a foundation for a base for research, public education, and demonstration. So, but cost, I think for everybody, I think Andrea and Stephanie talked about it. Cost is a big concern. So next slides, I want to just mention different approaches to LID implementation. When we talk about using LID for improving the water quality or water resource, things like that, there are different options. One could be new construction. If we have a new community to build, or just one single building, either through regulation requirement or through the if the landowner has a conscious conscience about environment, he or she might be interested in putting in LID. It could be distributed for every parcel or centralized. A community could choose to build a stormwater basin or multi-benefit basin, like one of the basins in southern Orange County that I think it has a long name. I forgot the name, but it's one of the multi-benefit BMPs that we built. It could also be for LID. It could also be retrofit, where just like our building, this is a retrofit LID project where we actually wanted to just refresh the parking surface. We have 3 parcels. The concrete are all cracked up and it looked really bad. And we wanted to put some money to improve the driveway and parking spot. And here's the opportunity to get some money to put in some LIDs. That's what we did. So the retrofit is a very important mechanism for implementing LIDs in Southern California, I think in other places as well. There are also, regional LID BMPs, things like if we, for example, on this graph, the lower left is actually a pretty good example of regional LID project. It's called Sponge City. It's in Jinhua City in Zhejiang, China. So this one, the whole city block, which actually is an island in a river, in a lake, the whole block was completely redone and redesigned and put in all kinds of LED features in it. And it is one of the banner projects in China. So pretty impressive. Or it could be the entire city, like Kigali, which is a city in Rwanda. They have this master plan where they're gonna achieve what water and energy neutral big city. That's a very aggressive plan. But if we have a bare land to develop a new city from ground up, it's entirely possible. Later on we have actually, well, we do have an example in city of Irvine, which from the LID maybe not so much, but it is one of the probably first ever city with a master plan. And UC Irvine should be very proud of itself because UC Irvine is one of the first pieces in this master plan. And the designer, which Pereira, I think, he actually said back in 1963 that in recent years, we here in California have become rather expert at abusing our land and our resources. Here we have a tremendous opportunity to point people's taste and expectations in another direction, and we can do it. The sheer size of the place make it almost anything possible. So this was 40, 50 years ago, and forward thinkers like Pereira could think about it. So I think we could actually learn from him as well. The last one, I think Stan actually, and I actually are working on this. This is an interesting idea, which is MS5. Here in United States, we call the storm drain system MS4 because it's a municipal separate storm drain system, MS4. But Stan is thinking about making it smart. So with smart, it become MS5, where we could use the flood control system and add some intelligent system like computer controlled valves to use the MS4 system to store water and link it to other systems, including LID, so that we can make better use of captured floodwater. So a lot of different new ideas. Next slide is about the LID and water quality. I think when we talk about LID implementation for people like me, which who I work mostly on water quality issues. So this is a big deal for us. What we want to do is using LID and features like biofilters to remove the pollutant from the stormwater. So usually this is implemented through stormwater permit, and every permit has about 5-year cycle. So the thought is after a few permit cycles, we try to achieve the water quality goal usually set up by TMDL, or total maximum daily loads. And the main graph looks like what is shown here. It is made by City of LA for its stormwater permit. And in Southern California, we have 3 major counties: Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego. So we call the plans to achieve water quality compliance different names. For Los Angeles, it's called Enhanced Watershed Management Plan, and for San Diego to our south, it's called Water Quality Improvement Plan. And for us, we don't actually have a name yet, but it's some kind of reasonable assurance analysis. So pretty much how we actually can reasonably reach the target for water quality. So we're still working on it, but we also understand there is a huge cost. For Los Angeles, it's about $50 billion. For San Diego, it's about 10. Orange County, we don't know yet, but I'm guessing. Don't quote me on this because these are just a pretty rough estimate. But for Orange County, it's 5 billion or so. It could change depending on the regulatory requirements and things like that. So just to give you a scale of things, this is not just for water quality, probably for water resources and other infrastructure as well. So a lot of investment for this. Next slide is just in terms of water supply. We talked about water quality. Water supply is also a big issue for Orange County. The center one is pretty much how we try to meet the drinking water demands. So you can see there are all kinds of different sources, including imported water from Northern California, the non-potable recycled water from the left. Underneath, water use efficiency, something like we use tiered pricing or things like that to encourage people to use water more efficiently. Could also be, things like how we can improve managing the groundwater basin. That includes the Santa Ana River base flow. We are talking about the upper right side of the screen. So we Orange County Water District actually actively infiltrate the base flow from Santa Ana River to replenish the groundwater basin. Then, for storm flows, there are dams to keep them in the storm and release it very carefully after the storm so that the water can actually infiltrate into the ground. I think in the last few years, all the water, every single drop of stormwater has been managed like that. So it's pretty impressive. So for things like LID, it's a little bit discouraging, but you can see that LID actually is somehow related to this incidental percolation when we talk about water resource. So, until now, it is a very small portion of the groundwater replenishment in terms of how the Orange County's groundwater basin is managed. So what we should do actually is try to maximize the incidental percolation so that the groundwater and drinking water source can be better protected. I don't think we can solve the problem by doing more LID and increase the percolation, but we can help. So next slide. Well, I think I'm trying to summarize the what my thought is in terms of LID implementation. I think, as I mentioned, LID implementation is subject to many constraints. Could be natural, could be ownership, could be cost, could be regulations. It also, has many benefits. We try to leverage and maximize it. We could do by holistic watershed approach. I didn't mention that, for all the different counties, their plans actually are more or less based on models. So we try to model the, the implementation at different places and see how the watershed respond. Of course, we need to be adaptive because I think LID is still a growing science. We need to just feel our way through implementing the LID at a wider scale based on the lessons we have learned. We also probably want to integrate LID in infrastructure planning because infrastructure now for the built environment, it's a huge elephant in the room. It's very hard to use LID implementation to impact infrastructure because I think it's much easier to actually incorporate the LID elements in the infrastructure planning and implementation so that the impact from the new development could be minimized, and the new infrastructure can actually mitigate the impact by the existing infrastructure. So there are a lot of planning to do, and this is actually our thoughts when we work with the folks from San Diego, because they are dealing with this on a pretty high level and larger scale when they try to deal with their permit compliance. I think Stephanie did a very good job in terms of operations and maintenance. Yeah, it is a very big issue. If we don't maintain the LID we put in the ground, it's not going to work. This is some of the things that we try to test out in our campus project as well. It's interesting, when everybody is happy when the project gets funding, but when we talk about operations and maintenance, people start to back away. So it'll be interesting to see. So last slides. I'm actually done, but I just want to show you the concept of LID in China. It's called sponge city. It's a term coined by the president of China, because he's not a scientist, but when he think about the water resilient city, because there are major flooding issues for most of the major cities in China, and he was like, why not build cities like a sponge, so we can they can absorb water when it rains and things like that. So but I think some of us will actually go to China this late June, early July. We'll see how they implement their LID, and probably we can get some ideas how we can learn from each other. So now, with that, I'm open for questions.
Any questions for John? One or two before we move on?
Maybe actually this is a question for both you, Jian, and also Stephanie, about the maintenance. So I think both of your perspectives are maybe more focused on the government projects and maintenance of the larger scale installations. I'm just wondering, what the thought is about maintenance of the distributed systems at the allotment or household scales.
Wow. I think that's a question that probably Scott can provide some feedback. I think this is we just had a very good example at City of LA, Los Angeles. I think we all heard about the project for the Elmer Street. I think right now they are experiencing some operations maintenance issue, because I think the initial understanding was that the homeowner or homeowner associations were responsible for maintenance, but I think it fell through. If you go to Elmer Street right now, I think it's not in a very good condition. So in terms of operations maintenance for the private land or private parcel, I don't know. There has to be an agreement put in place, before the LID is put in the ground. Otherwise, without proper maintenance, it's just almost like a waste of money.
Sorry, Stanley, do you mind just, I'm not sure to have gathered, in terms of, you saying like the private versus public, or the larger infrastructure compared to the small nature strip ones?
Yeah, Stephanie, based on what I understand of your talk, when you were talking about maintenance, you were really talking about the projects which are larger scale and owned by the local shires or governments.
Yes.
And I know from Andrea's talk that there were quite a few of these projects which were built at the household scale, and I'm just wondering if those are on your radar, or who is responsible for making sure that they don't go off the rails?
Yeah, like very good point. So that's part of the conversation which has been evolving, I guess, where it was very much in council's mind, at least, what was on private system, we were not going to go there, sort of aligned in terms of maintenance, and so aligned with, you know, what council would back away from for any other infrastructure. You know, we're not building on private property because of access issues and because of being able to run our schedule, maintenance schedule as we do on public land. However, and so at the moment on the LSC project, it's actually on a case-by-case basis. You know, gathered a few colleagues to go and help the LSC team, but that's really led by them. It wouldn't be something that we're not that we would do normally, and so the idea and the assumption is that private owners would look after the system on private land.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, both for you, John, and also Stephanie. Your presentations referred to oversight, governance. Stephanie, you referred to a working group, an oversight working group to try to coordinate efforts. And John, your presentation, one of the last slides talked about a water advisory group in Orange County. From at least the standpoint of getting various participants in the process to work together in terms of common objectives, is that what these bodies are about? I know they're different, but I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Water Advisory Committee, it's you know, it's almost like a discussion group where it's not a very formal committee with political power, but you know, in terms of the how the water situation is handled in Orange County, there are just way too many pieces for me to list them. So in this committee, I think it's mostly for informational, and these are, you know, an excellent platform where I got a lot of information from that helped me understand the situation in Orange County. You know, one of the issue actually related to the topic we have today is that you know, I wish there is a, you know, incentive program similar to what Andrea talked about. Even though Orange County actually, Orange County Water District did pay for some of the, you know, diversion projects where we actually supply you know, diverted water for reuse, so they are the benefit. They receive the benefit of the recycled water, and they actually pay money for it. I think ideally, you know, this is a topic that I probably, hopefully, you know, I can bring up later on in the future to the committee, that, you know, if we as a county or other agencies can promote the implementation of LID, you know, Orange County Water District can actually incentivize the practice, because they charge money for people who pump the groundwater, and whatever activities that could supply the groundwater aquifer, they benefit from it. So I just need to, you know, think about how this one we can put this into the money term.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, did you want to comment at all on the oversight working group?
Yeah, so these were put in place a year or so ago, and to respond to various issues. So at the technical issue, you know, I've talked about some of the mistakes and lessons learned that we were able to learn, and sort of use this group to disseminate these lessons learned. It's a very practical level, but the steering committee is what we've used as a conduit to continue the discussion, which required a high level of decision making, such as this maintenance issue, which was, you know, known by all, but was not able to be addressed if these people able to make the decision were not involved. So So that, yeah, that worked out well to continue leading the discussion and bring and keep the agenda, I guess, the maintenance on the agenda. Yeah, what it is at the moment, it's purely internal, and what we'd like to see it because of these remaining challenges that we have in terms of funding cycle is to potentially use some of the members of the steering committee to go outside and to discuss with water authorities. So that's the next conversation, but using the same group, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you very much.